haven't started recording yet.
But then I have to say at least Philomath has a YouTube channel, so maybe that's scope there.
Oh, Fitz has been working on it.
Okay. City of Philomath Planning Commission meeting. Call to order. Can we have a roll call?
Sure. Don Barlow may be joining us shortly. Van Hunsaker.
Here.
Josiah Jessen.
Here.
Timothy Millett.
Here.
Darlene Rose is excused. Haley Green.
Here.
Gary Connor.
Here.
And Ruth Causey from the City Council. And for staff, you've got Michael and Chris.
Okay. First order of business minutes from August 19th. Motion.
I don't have any comments, but I'll make a motion to approve the August 19th.
Okay. Here, seeing no comments. All in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous. So development code language update. Somebody want to start? I'm willing to, unless.
Let's give a little background real quick. So, I don't remember. Yeah, so I touched on this a little bit in the agenda item summary. We're going through about 8 different versions of the development code update from different meetings that we had last year and trying to get them all into one track changes version of the Word document so that it can be easily digested by the public for what is new, what is being removed. Track changes doesn't play nice within itself, so just because you have track changes in one document doesn't mean you can copy all those track changes into the other. You would have to go in and copy paste and redo it as if it's for the first time.
Yep.
So it's been tedious, it's taken some time. So there's quite a few changes specific in residential, commercial, industrial that we've talked about and have not been reflected or updated in this version of the track changes Word document. So I touched on it a little bit in the memo, but not clearly enough. This is an attempt to get all of the climate-friendly area definitions in there, the climate-friendly area sections in there. Did a pretty substantial overhaul to the annexation chapter, which hopefully you saw as far as just all the red line. But it is not a comprehensive view of all of the changes that have been made up to this point. We're still working on that. It's just a tedious time. Honestly, I was talking to Mike this morning. I feel like this week is the first week I feel like I could even prep stuff to give to him to start going through it and doing that process himself rather than me doing all of it, because we're just now getting up to where I feel like from not having a planner for all those months. So it's taken a little bit more time than I was anticipating, but now that it gets rolling, I think that, it's just a tedious process going through it. My concern is we're still going to have other things to talk about, discuss as we do that. And so I do have some kind of higher level policy things to talk through. And then I do want to make sure that we talk about some scheduling and what that looks like. I'm not opposed to bumping things out a little bit more to make sure that we give ourselves and you and the public time to digest it. But I want to be cognizant of the fact that we don't want to delay things more than we absolutely need to either. So with that said, I'm happy to talk through table of contents and the order a little bit. We can share it up on the screen and kind of go through it together. And I do need to apologize. The intent was to get an email to all of you in addition to the memo to say the documents posted to the agenda. And we weren't going to print 270 pages, 3/4 of which isn't really relevant because it doesn't include the changes we've made. And I frankly just didn't have time to dissect off all of the parts that weren't, or that were updated and send those, because that seems incomplete as well. So we are in a little bit of a catch-22 where we're kind of in between this update, but we wanted to have the update, we wanted to have the meeting and talk through it still, even though that final work isn't completed yet, so.
Okay.
All that said, I'm happy to talk through that table of contents, happy to talk through a couple of policy things I'd like some direction on tonight. And then want to just make sure that we've got time to talk through engagement later next month and other outreach and then calendaring.
Okay, sounds good.
Next iteration, when you added more stuff, will that be in a different color? How will we know it's new?
We're using the default track changes, so it's new is underlined and old being removed is a strike through. Yeah, but it won't be multi-color, it'll just be red underline or red strike through.
Can we, I wanna, like up front, maybe have a short conversation about how you can, what's the best format to share? Cause I know we gotta eat this elephant in chunks. But the best format for sharing the changes we wanna review for like the next meeting. Cause the link, the PDF at the link in the agenda is not the most easily reviewable document. In my opinion,
Sorry, can I pause you there? I'm just gonna let John in real quick and just note 6:07 that John joined us here.
hey John.
Are you there now, John? Cause he kind of flashed up and then.
He might still be connecting.
At least he's muted.
Hey John, were you able to connect?
There, we see ya. You're still muted.
Am I unmuted now?
There we go.
So we were just talking about the best way that the city can share with the commissioners the document that we want to review or the part that we want to review. Because I feel that the PDF at the link in the agenda is not the most easily reviewable document. My preference would be access to the Word document itself. But I recognize that might not be possible because we also have to share it with the public through the agenda. And ultimately, we are going to have to, after we eat all the chunks of the elephant, we're going to have to look at it as a whole and make sure everything's cohesive as well.
I'll just add on to that a detail. When I downloaded that as a PDF to my computer, it kind of shrunk it up and put the comments section, because there was like one thing that was highlighted in the entire thing. And so it was really too small for me to easily page through and read, because that just made the font small enough.
And that's been a challenge I've had anytime I'm like trying to convert a Word to a PDF and there's any review, even if you have it to original, it'll still default to that underneath layer. I don't know why. But that's been, and it's like the way that, and I don't know if we have the ability here, I need to ask it, would they have access to the 365 version of Word? Because that's the only way I know where multiple people can make changes and it'll track by name, but it also has its disadvantages too.
Yeah.
That it sometimes will, if people enter something at the same time, it'll cancel each other.
Yeah, I don't think we're allowed to do that as a planning commission.
Right.
But
We can share the Word version. It's not, even at 200 some pages, it's not gonna be that large of a file. There's not a lot of images or anything, so we can share the Word version next time going through. I still think that's, and again, I'm happy to provide the hard copy as well upon request, if that's easier for you to go through that way. So we're going, either way, we were really just trying to simplify it. I am looking at this, when it got converted to PDF, it did go to blue instead of for red, so again, I don't understand all of the workings of Microsoft and the Adobe and how those correspond and interact. Last time I saw this version, it was red, and now it's blue, so, to that point, we can provide it in Word for review, we're still gonna be able to provide access to the public. So we can work that out going forward and make that a little more clear. So I think the Word version is searchable, it's gonna look similar to what we're looking at, yeah.
And when I look at it, I'm gonna look at it in a PDF, and I'm capable of printing from Word to a PDF that works for me, and I would imagine that there'd be some way that you guys could too, and a lot of the public would prefer to have a PDF, because you don't need Microsoft Word to read it.
And one thing that will be coming along is like, because of the e-permitting requirements and electronic documents, Leilani and I are gonna be trading in Bluebeam, and Bluebeam has a plugin that we can convert to PDF that I've had better success than going through Adobe.
Yeah, and that's what I use.
But I think that won't be till January when we're really.
Well, if you've got a Word file you wanna print, I can print it for you and give it back.
Yeah,
So for the next meeting though, Commissioner Jessen, we'll do a better job of giving it to you in Word, we can provide a PDF. The online version will be PDF for the public to see, but we can provide it to you in both formats and
Thank you.
try to make sure that they look.
And I don't know what, like you said, I don't know what the deal is about having that PDF that looks like this online, and then when you download it, it doesn't look.
Yeah, I don't know either. I did go through, Commissioner Jessen had asked for a hard copy. So I did go through and like delete the comments, and the comments on the right side were mostly like highlighted and just formatted.
Yeah, if you delete all that, then.
So I deleted all those, was able to get it full scale and print off, and so that's what it looked like when I printed it today, which is again, a little bit easier.
So that'll probably behave better as well.
Yeah, so we will work on the format, so I appreciate the comments there. Can help with that.
The other comment about just general format is the numbering in the body doesn't match the numbering in the table of contents.
And it won't, yet, so we're still moving things a little bit.
Okay.
So we're not spending a lot of time. If we did, every time we move something, we have to go back and renumber everything. So we're gonna get all the text right, and then we'll go through and get all of the numbering right. Some of the highlighting that we did was, it was referencing specific numbers, and that'll be the path going forward, is we'll just highlight those, and then once it's done, then we'll go back and make in the correct reference. Otherwise, again, we'll spend all of our time just updating the number.
No, yeah, they're referencing, but even the headers aren't.
Right.
Related. So, are you thinking that will be in place before the next meeting?
Yes.
Yes.
There's all sorts of them.
Were you saying something to us?
Not unless you need quarters for the dryer.
I think, see, I was very confused of what I was supposed to be reviewing. And so I just started from the front and went through it. And I didn't even get to the area that you've talked about, you wanted to go through, having to do with the environmental overlay.
What's happening from the area?
Friendly area. So I didn't even get to that, and I spent about 5-6 hours in the document. And I'm gonna send you all my comments so that you have them, so that there's some value to that. But next time, if there's specific portions of this document that you're looking at us to review, other than trying to review the elephant, I would appreciate
Yeah, page this through there.
whatever it is.
And general status, you know, like if it,
Yeah, those kinds of notes would be great in the agenda. You can still send a link to the document. I don't think we have to print off 300 pages every meeting, but yeah, some direction.
And I'm good with it electronically. I don't have a problem with that.
So I did try to capture that in the issue statement on the item summary. And maybe I wasn't clear enough, but I said the memo is an update on city staff's progress in updating city development code draft of the development code table of contents, application types, review procedures, annexations, CFEA, and some housing sections have been completed, but I didn't specifically just focus on those areas, but I did list out those areas that have been incorporated into here. And then obviously excluded from that, but not stated, was the rest of the housing, commercial, industrial, et cetera. But I guess, again, could have been more clear.
Yeah, that would have been good too. And I will generally always, I mean, considering the size of this, I think we need to receive what you guys think is done and then have like at least a week. I mean, I know packets, there's like the rules, but this is way more than a packet.
Understood. My focus in going through this was also similar to Commissioner Millet, to start at the beginning and start kind of going through as far as we could go. There were specific areas that got skipped intentionally because I knew that they were somewhere in a different document that I need to go, and I was just trying to make progress and really take the first big bite out of this elephant. And so, using that metaphor, that was the intent, was to get something that we could get reviewed and go through it, and most importantly, to make sure that I could identify some of those policy areas where I need some additional direction from you, so that we know what code or the type of code that we need to write in some of these areas. So I do have a couple of those spots tonight that we'll go through. I'll be looking for some specific direction from you on what you think, and I'm interested to hear Michael's opinion on that as well, because some of the stuff we've not talked through yet. So I think we can still have some good discussion tonight, even if you hadn't have an opportunity to read through the specifics here. In particular.
Would it be okay to go all the way to schedule right now to discuss that, since we're just like,
Sure.
I hate leaving that to the end after our brains are fried and we're
Sure.
trying to come up with details. Who knows how far we'll get. So, that September 30th is 2 weeks away. And for whatever it's worth, I will not be at that meeting. But it would be nice if I had a document with enough time in advance, because I will have time a few days prior to that to spend some time looking through it.
It's going to be this same document. It's going to show more of the track changes from housing, commercial, and industrial that we've talked through in previous meetings. So that's just going to be rolling forward and trying to capture that all in a document.
Yeah, we're gonna have
More of or all?
Yeah, we're gonna have 2 meetings next month.
Well, we're looking at second and,
Second.
well, so October 21st would be their regularly scheduled meeting. So you're wanting earlier in October?
That's what we talked about.
We're doing the September 30th instead, so
Oh, maybe that's.
September 30th is,
I have, yeah, just the 20.
30th and then the 21st, so nothing on the 17th or the 14th.
no, we'll have a city council meeting on the 14th. We do have, you see the public outreach there on October the 13th. And then the day prior to that on Saturday is a open house at the fire district on October the 12th. We'll probably have a different crowd at those different events. And so want to propose having the tents up and volunteers to staff the information booth at both events. So, you know, we don't want to wear out our volunteers, but if we have volunteers for that Saturday and the Sunday, and then a meeting on the 21st, look at first week in October, but you know, at this point, we're just needing staff time to get things compiled more than what we're needing to get things in front of you.
Goal to be ready by the November 4th hearing, right? Not pushing that out.
The other issue that's come into play is we've got a pre-application meeting tomorrow for an annexation site plan review, and so that's going to take some time as well. So we'll probably have to look to bump that November 4th date out anyway, just because we'll likely be having a hearing on that date. and it's not a simple variance, it's gonna be complex and it's gonna take up the time, so. And that, again, Michael just got that scheduled here last week, and so it's just hit for tomorrow's, tentative meeting, or our planned meeting for our pre-app meeting.
And my question is, how much before the public hearing are we gonna be able to have final document out? Normal packet duration is, you know, if there's people that are like contractors and developers and others that really wanna look at this.
Yeah, I'll ask you that same very question. I mean, how much time do you think is appropriate, and how? Yeah,
I think 2 weeks, I mean.
okay.
Anybody have any other numbers in their head?
In my mind, I would even mind either, although this tentatively was November 4th, I wouldn't mind, because of the holidays and everything, waiting until after the first of the year myself.
But we have the climate friendly area thing.
Oh, yeah, we have to do, that's right.
That's what we said last year.
Yeah.
And here we are.
And here we
Which brings up the topic of what we may end up having to do is just splitting this thing, as much as we were anxious to be all encompassing and try to get it all done. I think with the climate friendly area and just the time it's taken to really pull everything together, and it will continue to take pulled together, I think a good next step might be for Michael and I to look at this and address the climate friendly area things that have to get done. And then see how much of the rest of this we feel like we've got some good uniform on. I think depending on how tonight's discussion goes, the layout, Vision 2, which talks about operations, types of applications, all that. I mean, that goes back to prior, this time last year that's been floated out there, and whether it went to the public or not. And really, I don't think a lot of people are having a lot of heartburn about that. It's procedural, it's administrative, and not a lot of changes there other than improvements and clarification. So maybe that gets tied in there, and we can get that much of it done before the end of the year. Then the rest of it gets punted out until January, February. So January, keep it close.
If we go that route, how are we gonna handle versioning? We're gonna have we have a code document that's in place today. We're talking about releasing the next version, which includes climate friendly areas and maybe some other administrative stuff. And then we'll have another version that incorporates everything we're also gonna talk about tonight. So how do we?
Just date it.
Okay.
Yeah, we just date it. We won't send the first version, the first portion of it. We won't codify that or anything. We'll just get it adopted and keep it in ordinance code language until it gets passed. Then we'll send it all and get it all codified at once.
What will you present to the public?
When? Which time?
Well, either time. September or October.
Yeah. I think based on the feedback that we've been getting, and Michael, feel free to correct me here, people are very interested in the zoning, and they're interested in the map, they're interested in their house on the map and what's gonna change for them. There's been interest in the middle housing and how kind of the expansion of what the R2 is gonna allow for. There's interest in where the apartments are gonna be, where's the high density gonna be allowed for.
And excitement about the C3 that will allow potentially or retail or regional center.
So they're not beating down your doors to get this 250-page document.
The developers, the contractors, they've seen the draft versions of like the table that we worked on that has the different allowed uses and all that, and they're excited about that. I've gotten feedback from a few of them on things, and they've had recommendations, and I've given rebuttals, and they've said, oh yeah, no, that makes sense the way it is. And so no real changes recommended from them on there, some clarifications that we can add in. Did get a recommendation to add in the C3 to allow for townhomes in addition to apartments, condominiums. If they can meet the density, doesn't matter if it's an apartment complex or a townhouse development. So we can have that policy level kind of decision about adding that into the table. Outside of that one, not heard any other kind of feedback on the table. So I think to answer your question, very high level in my opinion, I'm not getting from the public that they're really concerned about, side yard setback differentials or any of that type of stuff in those details, as much as they're important. They're really important to you as planning commissioners because that's what you're looking and reviewing and part of your, part of that review and making sure that it's going to develop the way that you want to develop. But I don't think the general public's really that concerned about the meat of the text that's in here, although we just need to have it available to them. We have to have it available to DLCD 35 days before our hearing, right? Substantially the same. We can make small alterations even during the hearing, but we need to have the substantial language prepared and ready to go in front of DLCD at least 35 days before that hearing takes place. So I think we put the time out, but I think we really do focus in on the zoning map, the allowed uses, and then those significant areas. I think North 12th Street, College Street, East Highway 20 on the north side, south kind of Mill Pond Industrial, that area is a fairly large area that's going to have a zone change. So I think those major areas where the zone change is taking place, that makes sense, but I don't know that I'd go into a whole lot more detail in the hearings other than to answer questions that might come up.
I think that people are interested in a few of the details, like what sort of a property is gonna be allowed to have an ADU, what the rules are. We could just look at like a sample street and say, yeah, half these houses could suddenly have ADUs or not.
Yeah, and I guess I envision that part of that zoning high level, the allowed uses within those zones, I guess is one, that to me, that's still, where is an ADU allowed, right? To me,
It is
that's-
dependent on the details. You can say, these lots are too small, these lots are not too small.
And there's one of them, I'm sorry to, there was one property that tried to do an ADU, but the rear yard setback requirement is the same. I think that's part of the discussion too. It's like, because I know from a fire code perspective, they don't want an ADU within 10 feet of any other structure, including a fence. So does it make sense to consider having the rear setback for ADU, which would specifically be for R1, so like with R2, if you have an ADU, it's just gonna be a 2-unit property, and do you have the minimum lot area to have two units? So it's looked at a little bit differently, but the setbacks may still come into play in that rear yard.
Yeah,
And so that's just something that,
And not that everybody can digest that, but I think it's
Yeah.
worth just kind of throwing out there that
yeah.
there's a lot of details about whether, because if everybody walks away from the public hearing thinking, oh, I can now build an ADU in my backyard, well, maybe.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, maybe, yeah, depends.
We have maps that are ready to go.
The zoning map hasn't changed since we looked at it last,
May, I think.
yeah, so we've
I was looking at it today. I think May's the last one.
not made any, we just, and again, it went out to the farmer's market here a few weekends ago and
Survive the wind.
I'd love for it to be 3 times that size though. It was a little bit.
Yeah, it's like, and I have the ability, there is a plotter over the Public Works building. I may just have to try to get that to the size and get it to the plotter.
Yeah.
The next one, because I agree, it's like it was a little hard to read. And I've also been working with the GIS person over in Public Works to work on a GIS map, so that way the tax lot boundaries can be black versus this orange color. Just made it very fuzzy, which is why I left the tax lots out of there, because it looked a million times worse.
Yeah.
Just because of the color of it, and then it just did not look presentable in my opinion.
Yeah.
But
A big one.
have that show up to the public.
I mean, the downtown area was like this, so you could kind of see, but it was hard.
it was real intent for a property owner to be able to, pinpoint where they were at and see the zoning around there, and then be able to look at the second map to see if it was gonna change or not, and.
Was there a lot of interest?
When people look at, just like when I explained the R2, said that sounds like a good idea, trying to find ways to make housing more affordable from that perspective versus like a bigger, like giant multifamily that's going to be affordable, and just having these smaller options. There seemed to be general support, and I didn't get any negative comments from that. It was more like the 2 negative comments had nothing to do with the zoning map. It had to do with one site and 9th Street.
I am hoping that we get people's attention through some venue for the people, especially that live in areas that will be changing, you know, in a wholesale way. College Street, office residential to the various types, and which sections are going to remain commercial versus ones that are going residential, because people are gonna care.
What does that look like to you, that outreach?
I don't know, I was thinking about sending Brad an email saying that he needs to write a very incendiary article about how the city's gonna change everything. So you can get people's attention.
We have property owners on College Street that are very aware of this, and they have property that either they want to divide and put a house on, they want to put an ADU on it. I mean, I'm more than happy to put those folks in touch with Brad and say, hey, here's your feature article about what the impacts are going to be, and then kind of a more general overview of what
Yeah.
the changes would look like.
Yeah, so if he really highlighted it at the right moment in time, I think we could get some good attention.
And we actually spoke with someone who was in the OR with what they were wanting to do, and if the proposed zoning changes happen, they're going to be able to do what they want to do right now. They can't because the residential properties are not
Right.
conforming because of the single family.
Which is a perfect segue to my next question. What do they do to us if we delay the climate-friendly area a month or something into the next year and just don't split all this up and just push to get it all done as soon as we can just get it all done?
We will be non-compliant with state law.
Yeah, but,
Yeah.
yeah, you're going to jail, Gary.
As a
You're
chair.
going to jail.
Mr. Chairman, I can handle that. But
But
I'm thinking it's probably Chris, not me. But you know, I can't really do anything. It's probably this mayor, right? Way more.
We'll all be there together.
Yeah,
Let's just get it done, okay? It's not impossible.
Because I know with some of the well, I'll go back to the previous municipality I worked at, and where we had things where state law or a law came in where we had to deal with that. It like how we handled it there was like it was just ordinance, like the recommendation, planning commission, city council do ordinance on that piece, and then once all those timelines were done, then we did the ordinance saying this is the final version with all the changes, and that was how they were able to remedy that piecemeal part. Because it's like what you don't want to do is like have multiple times where you're having to split up 3 or 4 times, but once in a while that can't happen. So there's got to be some sort of early way to say, okay, these are things we have to do by law, and now we've incorporated those, and then we can have that final draft, which has those things that we were mandated by law plus our own changes if we have to do that. But it's just kind of a recommendation that if we have to go down that road, that is an avenue where it can be confusing in one way, but in the end, it's going to get you everything.
I just think about getting to the total finish line on everything we've been doing for 2.5 years now.
Yeah.
That if we do it all in one batch, we're gonna spend less time than if we split anything. As soon as we split something, it's gonna take more collective time, more meetings, more everything. And if we can just be non-compliant for a few weeks, they're not gonna send in the national.
Is there somebody you could
January anyway.
talk to that they're at DLCD that, it's, just kind of tell them where our dilemma's at and say, if we're a month later, you're gonna do something to us?
Apply for extension?
Or can you do that? Or is there anybody you would even dare say that?
Yeah, I mean,
Forgiveness is easier to get than permission.
Yeah, well, I mean, acting in good faith, there's something to say about that also.
Because I
Pull this back up, though, we talked about it long enough, we could have done it.
I mean, honestly, I think the climate-friendly equitable area, if we just did those changes, which is some definitions and a little bit of language change, you're talking a pretty quick hearing process. It's probably not an entire meeting, probably a hearing at the beginning of the meeting, some discussion, some testimony. We have to get through the script, but I don't see a lot of people coming out of the woodwork about the climate-friendly equitable area discussion in and of itself.
I have misgivings about merging that with our existing zoning the way it is now, because we haven't really worked through how they merge together to look for unintended consequences, and we could end up with some odd situations with our current zoning plus the CFA that we've been talking about.
I think the only,
Maybe I'm wrong about that.
I think the only part that could potentially be an issue, and it might be after the changes are too, is if there's some sort of agreement of affordable housing in the CFA where they're getting money, then the piece where it's like where any residential will be on the upper story is nullified. They can have it on the bottom story as well in that specific circumstance. But I don't know what seems like what Chris and my conversations have been like on the change in the language from what's there now to what's going to happen if that really changes that one possible area that there could be an issue. It's like because if one did come in and ran into agreement, then we're going to have to allow it bottom story, top story, and just because it's in the CFA. Yes, because they came back in that last meeting with that change, which I knew about that change when you all knew about it in Justin's presentation. So that's the one part I'm like, well, we wouldn't be able to mandate it in that part, but outside of that, we would still be able to say that there has to be commercial or office on the bottom story. I think that's the one area that there could be an issue with existing code, but overlay with an agreement, then the agreement nullifies that. And I think so there might be a way forward on that.
Yeah, we would look to you for that, but I think it'd still be contingent on all of us when we vote about to look at it both the way the zoning map is now and the way it would be in the future.
Because some of the guidance I gave to Justin, it's like I just got him the shape. It took a week to get all the shape file and the geodatabase items that he needed to create a map. But I wanted the because thinking that it was all going to be in tandem, I wanted to see when it was presented to you, it'd be based on what the proposed zoning, so we would be able to have that conversation in one piece. So I kind of started that that ball's rolling a little bit now. So it's like, and I think what'll help speed up in time, because now that we're kind of caught up to speed, I can help Chris out and with compare the several versions and try. I had to do that same work with things that are going to be dealing with anything in the floodplain and 1% flood zone. There are some changes at the state that are being required, and the pre-implementation starts December 1st. We don't technically have to have an ordinance till July 30th of the following year, but that's going to be something that's going to be kind of wrapped into this too. And I just gave Chris the document that took about 28 hours to compare all three and then just synthesize what's there and put it in some sort of digestible format.
Yeah, so what are you thinking, Chris? You're over there thinking harder. Maybe you're just
I-
wondering how long this meeting.
No, it's good discussion. I think that we should separate out the climate-friendly equitable area, notify DLCD, give them our intent, schedule the hearing for that November 4th date. That might be in unison with a public hearing we have to have for an annexation, depending on what their timeframe's gonna look like, or that one may become, well, it may be about then. Anyway, I think we separate out the climate-friendly equitable area. And that way staff can put our mind on a later date for the big public hearing, and we can have a more robust discussion about what does outreach look like. I mean, I think that we'll do a good job at farmers market and that I think we're getting a good sampling there, but I think we do need to talk about press releases. I think we need a press release just on residential. I think we do a separate press release focused on commercial and industrial, and another press release just focus on the zoning and the zoning map. And so we can float those out. Brad can run those, get a little bit more attention to it, have the public hearing date set already. But again, I think once people know how it's going to impact their individual property, I just don't think they're that concerned about, whether the setback behind their ADU is 10 feet or 15 feet. I just don't think they're going to give that much detail.
You're gonna do a press release for CFA?
Yeah, we'll have to. Yeah.
So what you're saying is if we went down that path in that direction on the next meeting on the 30th, we would concentrate wholly on the CFA. And that would be the documents we get so that we're able to fully flesh that thing out.
Well, CFA, correct me if I'm wrong, CFA kind of got finished at our last meeting when Justin was here. We went through everything, made all the changes he
I'm only
presented.
saying I didn't have a chance to
So he presented all the changes that were made, all the definitions, all the review that he'd gotten, and said, this is the final. The only thing that I did was I took that document, I embedded it into this,
So are we
Changes
we
version.
ready to go to the next step with the CFA then?
But we had some comments on that, so.
yeah, I'll go back and look and see.
The-
if there-
Yeah, there are a few things that were adjusted, Justin, if I remember.
Yeah, there was a few
War
things that
thing,
needed to
yeah.
be changed. So is that,
I think we changed them. I think he said we'll get those changed and come back, but let me double check on that.
we're not really at the point of final deliberations and voting until after the public hearing
On the CFA?
on any of these changes we're making.
But,
So
but since.
it doesn't have to be total, final, perfect before the public hearing. It just needs to be.
But we'll take the current development, we'll go through and do all of the climate-friendly equitable area, and again, it's definitions, and then a new section that talks about the climate-friendly equitable area overlay district.
Right.
And pretty much everything is contained within those two, so definitions and then just that text language. So we can prepare that, send that to DLCD, and prep it for a hearing on November the 4th. So that we're making sure that we're underneath our time frame, because that gets in front of the city council in December. And so it gets us under the gun for there. And again, once we have those documents done, which won't take that long, then our focus goes to whatever we're preparing for that January date or whatever it's gonna be. And buys us a little bit more time and not feeling like we're having to set a date, change a date, set a date, change a date, which I don't wanna do at this point.
What you're saying is sometime in the next 15 days or so, you can submit the CFA to the state? Because you got like 34 days, right?
Right.
So if you back up from November 4th, you back up 34 days, you're sitting at the 30th or October 1st.
If that's the direction we'll go, we'll prepare that this week and get it submitted.
So along those lines, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, the CFA document, that section, is the intent to put it in this overlay districts section under land use districts?
Yes.
Or, okay, so that's where it's gonna go, and the definitions will go in the definitions section.
Right.
And then, so then for the public hearing, we're gonna have those fully incorporated into the existing code document. We're gonna pull those sections out, and that's what the hearing's gonna be on? That's what we're submitting?
Right.
Okay.
And I think this document, if you read through that, I don't think I have them at 1865, 350 right now. I think I've got them bumped into, yeah.
18,355.
So then those sections are basically set in stone after that hearing. And then we continue to move through the rest of our zone, the rest of our document changes.
If by hearing, you mean the hearing plus deliberation and approval,
Yes.
and then a recommendation to city council to approve, then yeah, that's what will go to city council. They'll have a hearing there, approve it. Once that's done, I mean, there may be minor modifications, but that's gonna be it. And again, once that gets set, then we'll focus all of our attention to preparing for,
Got it.
I'm saying January, just because I'm thinking December's doesn't really buy us a whole lot more time. January gets us a little bit closer where I feel like we can get there. You're still talking about doing public outreach and public notices and all that in the months of end of November and December, which is, people are around, but I don't know if they're overly paying a lot of attention, but I don't know if they're paying any much more attention in January either, so I think the best we can do is get it out in front of them and look for feedback.
So in the future, after we're all done with code changes, map changes, it's all been implemented. If we want to make updates or edits to the CFA section in the overlay districts part, does that require special procedure? We have to have, special hearings and go through the whole review process by city council and then submitted to the state again, just over that section?
So any change to the land use and development code has to go through this process, yeah. Yeah, it's a type 4 legislative, hearing.
Got it.
Yep. And I fully anticipate, Commissioner Justin, I fully anticipate that when we get all done with this, we will find additional things that need to be done. And the typical standard operating procedure is we find those things, we identify them, we make note of it and our copies of it, and then 6 months later, we come back and we fix all of that, right? We notify, here's all the changes, notify DLCD, notify the public, have a hearing, talk through it, approve those changes, make the changes, update the code. And then 6 months later, we will do that again, right? So, I mean, this isn't one big lift, we're done for 5 years, this is it. This is a continual, at least annual, if not semi-annual process to go through and
Quite a few years before it's
pick
there.
up those things. Yeah, I mean, this is substantial. I think we all know that. This is pretty substantial, and that's been intentional. And that's because we've just updated the comprehensive plan. And if you remember way back a year and a half ago, we looked at that comp plan and those policies, and we wanted code that was reflective of those comprehensive plan policies that were put in place. And so we looked first at commercial and industrial, and we looked at those provisions and said, what do we want? We want environmentally friendly, we want labor areas, we want all of these things. And so we looked at code language to be a reflection of that. And we did a similar process with housing. So it all points back to that comp plan update. And, the comp plan didn't change significantly from the one from 20 years prior, but there were definitely some policy shifts there that we want to be reflected in the code update.
We just haven't done that procedure, that review, incorporate, vote on it. We haven't done that in the last couple of years I've been.
No, we just keep adding it to this one, right?
Yeah, no.
Keeps getting piled on.
Prior to the last couple of years, we did do that.
Yeah.
We just keep putting everything in the bucket and saying later. That's why
Bucket's getting
fired up to get that
Yeah.
bucket
It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
taken care
The
of.
bucket gets so big you can't digest it, right? And that's part of the problem, is where I feel like even at the staff level, we're kind of getting to. It's like there's so many changes. How do you present that in a way that's not completely overwhelming for everybody, including staff? But I mean, we'll get there. I think getting it all into one document will help, and a version that people can see what's added, what's taken away. But we're still going to need a staff report that's got a narrative that kind of explains big picture. Here's the zone changes, and here's why, and here's the key areas. Again, that high level stuff, that's where we're gonna talk through. And if somebody has a specific question about a specific piece of text, then we'll talk about it, but otherwise, we're not gonna go line by line through this, right?
And it may take more than one public hearing because
Is there any reason we can't go through the climate friendly overlay tonight? I mean, it's a few pages.
I don't think we have the updates back yet, do we?
I know there's some things that Justin, or I like gave him the thing that he was gonna update for like the memo and the document. And he just got that on Friday because I didn't get all those letters until noon on Friday. So, and he was out of the office on Friday. So I think he's back tomorrow. So I'll see what I get back, but I don't think he has everything that we requested for updates back yet. So that's the.
So the ones in this document is already, it's on its way to being superseded.
Well, it's like there's a change in, I think the memo it's like I told him, like, he wanted to see what the future land use, like what that was gonna look like and make sure that's incorporated since the office residential is going away, and being replaced with residential. Want to have that included in the map to show the impacts of what it's gonna be from there. So that was the thing that he hadn't given an update on yet.
But can we split it out like what we just discussed?
Split it out, then we can probably just continue with that, since that will not be moved or won't be germane yet.
We'll have
We'll have to take this map,
change it as soon as we issue.
but the map that's currently in this document that we received is the new zoning, so if we submit it outside of what's completing that, this is gonna have to go back to the old zone.
Right.
Well, I think what he gave should be with the old zoning because
No,
it has the.
Oh, no, it is the old zoning, I stand corrected, OR is there. I stand corrected. So it's consistent with where we are today.
Correct.
If we implement it in CFA.
Yeah.
There was more changes Justin or clarifications he was gonna come back with, right?
And
was something about ADA, the language that they used, and we were.
Yeah, I
wanted
had some
answers.
comments in our last
Yeah.
meeting, so I just haven't seen the new version yet.
But the point is, I don't think we have finalized text that we could move forward with yet.
And I'm trying to remember that email that I
Unless
got
we-
that had everything. I'm trying.
I didn't look at it.
Honestly, I think we have like 98% of the text right. If we need to change 2%.
Yeah.
At the hearing, during the hearing, again, I don't think it's anything that's preclude us from having a hearing on it.
No, not preclude us. I personally don't wanna look at it again until you guys say, this is it.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Then we'll just change it again.
Yes, we will.
We've said this is it twice, and then both times we go back to justice and say, we don't like this.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And we may hear something from the public, and after that, we may not like something. It'll be,
Why is climate? Highlighted.
search for climate.
Oh,
I mean, we can go through this a little bit tonight. It's probably gonna be more helpful to highlight those changes and bring it back with just the climate-friendly equitable area stuff and say, this is the documentation for the public hearing. Are we good with this? And we can do that.
Okay.
It'll give me more time to eat this part.
And then again, I will say, we will move it from this area. I had it down in 18,355, and we're gonna move it up into, the previous section, so it's under, land use. Sorry, I'm finding my,
Overlay districts,
in overlay districts instead of there.
subgroup of overlay districts.
In fact, I don't even have it in the, it's not on the table contents right now. I just have it, I just dropped it in there. I realize now that I dropped it in the wrong spot anyway, so.
Easy to do when you got that many subsections.
So right now it's under, I think it's under,
Say 355 doesn't exist in a table of contents.
yeah, I think I have it somewhere down in here, cause it was under the, our floodplain, districts, and it should be down here. So anyway, we'll get that changed.
There's a floodplain.
350 there, you got 18.
Overlay districts. This deals with FEMA, so I was gonna drop it under there, 355. Maybe I had to get it in the right spot, maybe I moved it.
You know, FEMA changes. That's a lot.
So, climate friendly area and equitable areas only. Hearing on November the 4th, we'll notify DLCD, we'll get that language in front of you at your next meeting. Completely separate, we'll just deal with that so we get our compliance with the state. Keep DLCD happy, which is important. And then we will also have at the next meeting an update of this section or this document. And to focus in on specific areas of that.
Well, you were indicating that you've pretty detailed right now in the residential, and you are. What's in this document is pretty detailed in the residential, but the commercial is not.
Commercial industrial had the big overhaul that was here, and most of that's what we set aside. That's what I need to go through and incorporate into the existing text, but I've not really started that process yet. So that one probably needs the most work still.
I have a suggestion.
And the table that we worked on having to do with
Loud uses,
no, the table having to do with setbacks, heights, lot coverage as it related to the different zones, that would be very helpful that you prioritize that.
yeah, and that's in
And-
the residential, and I think that's there.
No, I'm talking about the one that overall had all the different zones in Actually, no, you're right, it was in residential, what we had. Yeah, it's not there right now. So that if that was included, that would be great, helpful.
Sure.
And then getting that section pretty much done. So we can, so if next time, if we took this thing after we get the CFA out of the way, then we go in and we concentrate on completing the residential, getting it to 98% done. And concentrate just on that, because, I mean, I've got pages of comments, even with what's here. So to take and spend time actually in that document, and then, and have it completely completed, set it aside, then move on to commercial, concentrate strictly on commercial, kind of like we did under Pat, but kind of like getting it to,
Yeah,
into
once
the
it's in the
document, and that, instead of, that way, we're not looking at a 233 page document that we're looking at 60% of it. We're looking at 20% of it, and actually being able to use our time efficiently. Because none of us, I probably have more time than most, probably, I don't know about him, but since I'm retired, I have more time, but I still, you know, time is finite.
Yeah.
And if we could concentrate on saying, okay, the next piece is, let's get the residential 98% done.
So I have a suggestion before we even dive into that much. If we're gonna focus on CFA at the next meeting, and we're already 95% of the way there, I think a next little chunk we might be able to bite off in that same meeting is at least table of contents and maybe procedures. Table of contents, not necessarily making sure the numbers are all right, but that it's got all the sections in it we would expect to see, and procedures are pretty straightforward. So seems like we could do both of those in the same meeting, and then
Move on to
totally
the
agree with
different-
you. Yeah, next section, residential, commercial.
Then industrial.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind trying to get through both of those tonight if we can.
Are we not waiting on more feedback from Justin to do the CFA section though?
No, I think we're pretty close to there. There's only a couple things, and I think we can adjust those between now and the next meeting. Just bring it to you.
And I'm confused. Why are we gonna talk about CFA at all? If, you know, cause we were pretty much there at last meeting. We just had a few comments.
We're just gonna bring you back the responses to those couple of comments, and if there were tweaks or changes to the link.
But not talk about that tonight at all.
No, I don't think we need to talk about it tonight.
Okay. Oh, you said talk about it tonight.
No, I was talking about the index and the.
Yeah, I knew that, but
Stuff.
I thought you were talking about it. Anyway, good.
That's the way I read it too.
What I heard.
We're gonna skip CFA tonight and we'll look at it once it comes back. But I'd be ready for move back to the public hearing too. I don't know that. I don't know if there's enough left to talk about.
Yeah.
He made the changes, I mean.
We have to vote on those incorporations if there were changes.
In our deliberations after the public hearing. It still has to go to the city council for another public hearing.
It'll be short. I mean, we have to prep it anyway for DLCD, so we'll just drop in the packet for October 21st, and it'll just be a cursory look. We'll highlight, do a quick staff report, highlight what those changes were, what those discussions were, and then we can move on. I think it'll be fairly quick.
Okay.
Want to look at the index? Or
Sure.
share my screen. I gotta go back into Zoom so John can see us in its micro text. And we can't see you anymore, so you'll just need to speak up if you have a comment.
Thank you.
So we're taking out the establishment of zones. And we're replacing it.
Well, we're kind of getting rid of some of the flowery language about how to use the development code. It starts with "Welcome to Philomath Development Code," and we're just simplifying that. So we're going to go right into use of code divisions, which used to be a section that was in front of it. It's kind of preamble to even getting into the code. It wasn't even really part of the code. And I think that it's helpful. I mean, I think I'd been here for like 6 or 8 months before I was like, oh, when it says Division 3, that's what it's referring to, because the only time we refer to it is in that preamble section, and then even when you get into the code, it never really refers to it, other than to say you have to meet everything in Division 3. Well, it's like, well, where's Division 3? And you have to go to the table of contents to see Division 3, and even then it doesn't explain what it was. So I'm trying to highlight that our code uses 5 divisions, and these are the 5 divisions, and we're going to define them a little more clearly, and we're going to use those terms throughout the document a little bit more often. So that was the intent, was there's start with the divisions.
So we're gonna have a header when we get to Division 3, so that it says Division.
Yeah, so I added that in there, right.
Division 3.
So now when you go to Division 3, it's gonna say Division 3 land use districts.
Yes.
And then we're gonna have chapter, right, then we'll have chapter 18-300, land use district administration, and then we'll actually break it down further, because it'll be 18.300 point 005, 010, 015, and so we're gonna do a better job of stating and restating where you are in the document, so it's easier to follow. And then the sections we did update, that's there. I think if I scroll down just a little bit, I can give you a quick example of what I mean. So like here, Division 1 is our introduction, and then here's our sections, so use of the divisions, general definitions, etc. And then you get into here, it's kind of restating again, use of the divisions. These are all the sections that are in there, and then we start with that section. This was so funny because there's only one section, but in the other ones, you'll kind of see how we follow. I've kind of set up this layout, and we'll follow that. So try to make it much clearer. The other thing we did is that for Division 1, all of the chapter headings are 100 something. Division 2, we don't start at 120, we start at 100, or it's 200.
Perfect.
Division 3 is all 300. So again, when you look at a provision in the code, you'll know where to go to just based on the number, right? Not where it is in the number, but you'll know, oh, this is Division 2 or this is Division 5, based on if it's a 200 or 500.
Your residential, commercial, and industrial, it says pull out special uses. What did that mean?
Yeah, so if you remember when Pat was here, we were gonna have a whole separate section just on special uses. And so we were gonna pull those out of that section and have it be separate. I don't think we're gonna do that with this. I think our residential special uses will still be in that residential chapter. And then when we get to commercial districts and industrial, we'll have those pulled out, but they'll be at the end of those chapters as opposed to being in a whole separate chapter, which is hundreds of pages long. So, yeah.
Okay.
So that's an old note, but it reminds me that we need to go back in and fix some of that, because a lot of those did get pulled out, and so I need to locate them and put them back. Yeah. So just kind of following through on the Division 1, because I jumped ahead a little bit, sorry. So use of the code divisions, the general administration we've added to, some of that was like, well, let me follow down this list and I'll jump. So general administration, we've added to there some of the things that used to be in Division 2, some of the things that used to be how to use the development code, we've moved into there. And we just, the general administration is kind of just all, just like it said, all that administrative type stuff on the code and how to use it is there. So we'll look at that quickly. And then definitions is the same, although the order got moved around a little bit. And then the enforcement got added. That used to be embedded somewhere else. I'd have to go back and look at the numbering. But that enforcement's an important part of the development code, and it really is kind of its own beast. So we've added that in there and I've added some clarifying language there. And then we went to right to establishment of zones, and we're of course taking that out and gonna move that down to later, to Division 3. When we start talking about, because we used to go right into the zone, establishment of zones, residential, commercial, etc. But now we're gonna not do that. We're gonna go into Division 2, which before we start talking about all the different zones and what you can do in them, we're gonna talk about what is the application and the review process look like. And so to me, it's a little more logical to go from here's general administration, here's our definitions, and now here's the type of applications that you can submit. Let's look at all 4 of them and the material that you have to present, the material that has to be submitted, public notification process. So all of that requirement is now Division 2, which again used to be Division, I said 3, it used to be Division 4, it was at the very end of the code. Was now that you know all of the code, here's how you submit an application, which seemed like it was a little too late. So that's been changed. I don't think there's a lot of tweaks in here. I'll note some of the language in here I've even updated here this last week since this went out. Our master plan development is renamed. It's now planned unit development. And we've got some better language in there that allows for flexibility to avoid wetlands, forested areas, areas we want to preserve. It allows for higher density in other areas. So that language is completely redone. And we're looking at so that's the Division 2 side of things. How to do it, code interpretations, miscellaneous permits that are needed. Everything there. Major modifications, minor modifications. When you get to Division 3, this is our actual land use districts, and so this is where we'll start with. This distribution just explains kind of the process to go through, and then establishment of zones. It's going to be the table that we did with the definition of R1, R2, R3, C1, C2, C3, public. And then we'll also have a definition of the overlay districts as well. So we'll have our wetland, or our floodplain overlay, and then we'll include language on the climate-friendly equitable area overlay, and so we'll define those as well. It's just kind of a summary sheet, more than a specific reference that you'd go back to.
Where do you say that's gonna be at?
That'll be right here under establishment of zones. We can scroll down to get down to
3 now, okay.
yeah. And then allowed uses is the tables that we worked on. With all the tables, and remember we mixed those, so it's residential and commercial and industrial all in the same table. I think it ended up being 4 or 5 pages. Talk about formatting pain in the butt. I'll just say, yeah, I don't know why. Sorry, Microsoft, if you're listening, don't kill this feed, but you'd think going from Excel to Word wouldn't be so complicated when it comes to a table, right? But it's just, they make it as difficult as possible. So anyway, that's it. I think it ended up about 4 or 5 pages. They're by use. We definitely did a lot of cleanup there the last time that we looked at that, which has now been over a year ago. But again, I feel pretty good about those. If there's specific items that get brought up during the hearing, or if you want to review those next time and bring those, we can talk through it. But we spent a lot of time developing those charts. So unless anybody's changed their opinion on anything, I think they're pretty solid. And then we get into development standards, architectural standards, building material standards, which is the newest section that's been updated.
Question,
Yep.
those last 3 you did. Development standards, architectural standards, building material standards, why wouldn't they be in the design standard? Because they're not the land use districts.
I mean, why wouldn't they be
Well, Division 4.
in Division 4?
Yes.
I'm wondering,
At least the materials.
the architecture,
they,
design.
So
Well, one of the things, your architectural standards was you've done a great job of coming up with some graphics of the massing, which is key, tying it into the zoning and the amount of building you can use. So as far as the architectural standards are concerned, it really does, it needs to be, I mean, zoning is where it belongs, because if I was going through this as a professional, that would be the section that I would be looking at. Okay, how much mass I can put on this lot? What are my setbacks? What are all my limitations? Where now I get to my design standards, it's specifically getting in materials and specifically about the layout.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, well,
I mean, but the building material standards, I think almost needs to be in Division 4, because that really, on a conceptual level, as far as planning is concerned, as far as the zoning and the use of the lot and meeting zoning, it's ancillary, it's not primary, unlike the architectural standards.
Yeah, I buy that.
With
Because
the
rest of materials.
So I have like from the developer perspective, like when in the building material standards, like that's specifically for commercial and industrial, which is like saying what building materials can be used to meet the zoning for that environment. Does it make more sense to have it, or do you still think?
I think it needs to
Makes
be
more
in
sense.
design standards, because that's where I'm gonna go. I mean, I'm gonna stop, as a developer, when I'm first going through and figuring out what I can do, I'm gonna stop when I get to, okay, I can put 4 floors on here, the building can be this big, this is my setbacks, this is whatever, okay, I'm done. As far as what the cladding materials are of the building, that I would argue is you're starting to talk about like fences and hedges and landscape. Yes, that's very specific, different options. That's why I would move it down. I mean, my first thought was they need to go together, but now that I look at it in more detail, no, they need to be 2 separate, and they need to be in a separate division. Yeah, it's aesthetics.
Yeah.
It's important,
Yeah.
but it doesn't change, it doesn't restrict you planning wise what you can do on the lot. It does restrict what it looks like as far as finishes, but it doesn't restrict the massing or anything like that. And again, I want to say that the diagrams you guys did with massing and the like, excellent. Because if it's very intuitive.
Yeah, I mean, in short, the development standards are typically what you're looking at when you're just doing a development review. So a house in a neighborhood, a commercial building in a commercial district, you're just gonna have some very basic development standards that are just for development review that are just, again, placement, so you're looking at setbacks, height, these kind of basic items. But I agree, looking through, I'm not 100% in their architectural standards, but if they're more, I believe they're gonna be more similar to your building material standards, and so they could all drop down to that design standard. But we'll read through that section to see if there aren't some architectural standards that we would also look at and consider in that development review, as opposed to in a site design review. So we can look to split that up. But I 100% agree with you. It's very confusing for property owners when they're looking at placement of a building and it's in 2 different sections and 2 different divisions. But the point being, throughout the code is pretty consistent that it's gonna say, for example, a development review versus a site design review. For development review, that's ministerial. You have to fulfill the requirements of Division 2. That's what our, and so we want those conditions in Division 2 for land use districts to be very simple, and those ministerial type things where Michael's gonna go through and check the box. Setbacks, width, height, percent lot coverage, built materials, et cetera, right? And then if it's more than that, if you're talking a subdivision and we're doing a review, at the administrative level, we're looking back through, and now we're gonna look at those architectural standards, building material standards, and it's a little bit more than just, do they have 3 building materials? It's like, what percentage of those building materials, is it sufficient? All those types of things. So I get you. I totally understand where you're going, so we'll look at those sections and see if we drop them down into design standards. And we'll even look, I mean, landscaping's in there as well. We had some conversations initially. I wanna come back to it, so I'll kinda hijack this part of the conversation here to do that. Is there any amount of landscaping provisions that we want to have as a city, that we want to have at the development review level? I.e. a house on a property that's not part of a subdivision approval, because a subdivision approval has landscaping requirements with it. That then we hold every lot accountable for. If you're just a lot, not part of a current subdivision approval or a recent subdivision approval, you're just an empty lot and you want to put a house on it, there is nothing in the current development review that requires any landscaping to be put on that property.
Yeah, I'll bang
But-
this drum again.
Isn't it pretty required in?
Well, that's development, we only did all that for development.
In development, in design standard, yes, and for development review, there's not a requirement currently.
I
I think it should be precedent that
reading
it
it
should.
again, it's we should have language in there that will protect some of the legacy old growth trees that we have in this area, you know. Philomath prides itself on being, you know, a timber town with some old growth trees. We've dedicated trees and patted ourselves on the back and had ceremonies on Arbor Day about this, but nothing in our code has teeth to protect anything from getting cut down. There's a new development or somebody wants to do something.
Well,
So we did update our code and we do have that language now, but if I remember right, it was only for lots larger than 2 acres. And if it was smaller than 2 acres, we said we want provisions. If it was greater than 2 acres, then there are some protections in place there.
and they have to be in city limit, right? So we do have pockets of properties that aren't annexed in, so they can do whatever they want on their property, then they can
Yep.
get annexed. So it's like there's,
The
you might
language,
look at it and say,
the
oh,
language
that's
in our code
pretty.
that I'm familiar with is that we require developers who plant trees to have landscape after the development is done, nothing to protect what's existing.
No, we do have that language. We added that not too long ago. Yeah.
Which section?
I'll have to go back through and look, honestly. But no, we did add language that was for properties to be developed more than 2 acres. They had to identify any significant vegetation on the property, and there's some preservation language in there, but I can't quote it.
And I understand it's a fine line to walk between, you know, the city imposing ordinance on, you know, property within the city limits and a landowner wanting to do whatever they want to do on their own property. But it's not unique. There's many cities around us that have that kind of language in place that protects old growth trees.
A person though outside the city limits, all they have to do is look at the requirements and, oh, well, I'll cut these down and then I'll.
Well, let's not get too far down this track, because that's really a different topic than
Yeah.
what we started.
No, I know.
You're saying we have no language at all for a single dwelling that could be between 2 beautiful
Well, but
homes, and they could essentially clear out their property and it wouldn't look cohesive with the other.
I might even suggest our code,
Residents.
and our code kind of encourages that they
Well,
just clear it out and then submit your development
You
plan.
have to set some sort of a precedent, even if it's just a tiny one that's like, don't make it look, I mean, whatever. We have to be a little bit more specific.
What's being discussed now is not the question that Chris.
Yeah, so in our landscaping code right now, it's very clear. It says if you're doing a residential development or a subdivision, your lots have to have X percentage of ground cover, right? And it needs to be turf, and if it's not turf, we did this whole thing 3 years ago. A certain percentage, we have to have 3 different building material cover types, so we didn't want all bark dust, right? But you could do bark and rock and chips or some combination. So that language is there, but it's only applicable if you're doing a site design review. Site design review is only if you're doing a subdivision or I think it's a cutoff, but I think it's a 10 unit or above or something like that. But if you're just doing a single home or even a duplex where it's allowed in the residential districts, it's not part of the development review checklist, which is,
It's not part of the development review, but isn't it like fences? If you have a house that's, somebody builds a fence, whether it's a new house or not, it has to meet the zoning requirements, right?
No, if they don't have, right, if they don't have CCNR and they don't have.
Nobody needs,
It does, but fences aren't part of the development code. Fences are part of the municipal code.
But is that not true of landscaping requirements?
No, it's not, which is my point.
Okay.
So I think the solution is if we want to add that provision so that any new house that's built before we issue occupancy, there has to be a minimal amount of landscaping that's there. Typically, it's in the front yards. We don't typically require front and backyard landscaping, but there's a minimal amount of front yard landscaping that will be done before the city is going to issue occupancy on that house or duplex that gets built.
Well, I did not understand that before, so.
How much-
Yes, I think it should be.
So it will be, so it would be identified in this land use district's development standards. So we'll have square footage, density, width, depth, height, percentage coverage, fencing, landscaping, setbacks, and build two lines. So that landscaping provision is gonna be a little more beefed up.
Is all that landscaping requirement not just in one place so that you can just refer, it must meet these landscape requirements?
It can, yeah, it can reference forward to that landscaping division that's in Division 3.
It's in Division 4.
4, sorry, the new 4.
so along those lines, there is something, unless you had something more to.
I just wanted to say, everything that we just discussed didn't have anything to do with cutting down existing trees. That's a totally different topic.
I agree.
Okay.
Along the lines of putting something in, the land use district section to point towards design standards, we previously talked about a kind of a performance spec that we were going to pull out of commercial and industrial. I'm not sure if even residential is gonna, some of residential I think is gonna point to it, but we were talking about like dark sky compliance, noise and dust generation. It was all that, yeah, all of that kind of stuff we had talked about. Let's put that in a separate section and we can point to that section from all these different divisions. I'm bringing that up now because I don't see that in the table of contents, that I don't think we ever got around to actually creating the language for that spec. So it might be a good time to put that note in the table of contents, so when we get to it, talk about it.
Once upon a time, I put forward my proposed dark sky language for the city code.
Yeah.
But it,
He was really
Never-
excited about it too, for a while, and then it dwindled.
no, my excitement never dwindled.
I know,
was
I
looking
know.
for the right time.
Waiting in the weeds.
I'd be,
I think that's a good idea
I
though.
would actually be interested in seeing that because like from a review perspective, where I see in the existing code where it's like a little hard, it's like on the lighting standards and I get questions on that. And it's kind of really vague.
Right now.
Yeah.
And it's like, but I mean, it does kind of say it's like make sure it's not casting a shadow and all that, but that's different than like making sure the light's cast down and not going to cast up for migration and things like that.
Or spotlight.
Yeah. But like when it gets to like people like spotlights and all that, I think there is something in municipal code that might address that, like any of the.
Not that's being enforced.
Because I got a question, I'm like, okay, where is it? It's like, well, there's this part, this would fall in the nuisance side, so it's outside of zoning, but like trying to figure out where, for myself, where that line's at. And,
I will see if I can find my dark sky.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly would make sense on a new
Yeah.
building
Yeah.
to tell them what to do the right way first.
Yeah.
Instead of.
because I know there's been kind of like with some of the site design reviews that have gotten approved, and then the engineer comes back with some comments about overhead light, and like, well, they didn't say they were going to do overhead in the parking lot small enough that's lighting on the side that's not casting out would actually be sufficient for that specific. But that's a very narrow example of like where I'm like a little bit vague, and so I can see where like from the different departments that there might be some not quite being on the same page because of how to interpret language that's a little bit not too prescriptive.
Do we envision that being in this development review section? Again, development review is pretty limited in its scope. I mean, you're talking about a single unit home, a duplex. And I'm not saying that to screw one another, I'm just saying typically that development review is pretty limited. Most development in the city is gonna require a site design review, and that's gonna trigger the Division 4 design standards for that type of use.
Yeah,
Okay, so
that's,
there.
that's how, like, I envision, it's like it would be at that level, not at a development review, building permit, just making sure they meet the guidelines from that
They're
perspective.
not even gonna know. No. My picture's picked up.
Perhaps. There's quite a few updates here. I didn't go through and update this on this version, so you'll forgive me there, I hope. This is all just stuff that got moved up, so it got crossed out when I pasted it. The variances, we actually added up into the procedure section, right into how to apply, how to ask for variance, rather than having it down here at the bottom. So, I actually think by the time we get down here, I think that this is gonna be, so this is where we're gonna do those exceptions to code standards. I think we were thinking was gonna be where we were gonna draw the
Special uses.
special uses down into. But then I think, again, we've rethought that, we're not gonna pull it there, so I don't think we have a Division 5. I think we have 4 divisions. And the 5th division kinda got swallowed up by Division 2, which talks about procedures, which is really what this is all about.
You're gonna keep it in there as reserved or just cut it out?
It just goes away.
Okay.
So your non-conforming uses and developments, we handle that under the general administration procedures, which I wanna put a pin in that, come back to that conversation again. The variances gets added underneath in the bottom section about processes and types of applications. We don't need an introduction if we're not introducing anything. So,
And I have to say, from having to administer code in other places, having it in this format alleviates frustration I've had in other, where it's like it had all the special procedures down at the bottom, but you're having to go through and now having it in a section where that's logically where someone's going to look at from a developer standpoint or a homeowner, this makes so much more sense. So I have to say, thank you, Chris.
Good job.
it's the benefits of not being an educated planner. An experienced planner. But not an
Yes.
educated.
Logical.
Yes.
So let me take a little liberty and go through. I'm gonna hit some highlights. I don't necessarily want to go word for word here, but I just, again, try to come up with a more simplified title and purpose and combine those into one. It's the title and the purpose of what we're doing. Whatever, this again was language that used to be somewhere else. I brought it up into this overhead section, overall section. This is one I wanted to talk about with you here. Here's 18 and 30, and I'll try to blow that up just a little bit for everybody home. I'm gonna cut it off.
Just tiny.
So, we've had this topic come up in previous land use discussions and applications and an appeal, I think, recently. Upon approval of any development permit or any land use approval of any property which abuts or is served by an existing substandard street or roadway, the applicant shall make the necessary right-of-way dedications for the entire frontage of the property to provide for minimum right-of-way widths according to the city's public works design standards, and shall improve the abutting portion of the street or roadway, providing access to the property in accordance with the standards in chapter 18 / blah, 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 which is the street development section of the development code. Talks about our standards for a street.
I think that's pretty clear.
It's pretty clear. The benefits are, as development comes in, streets get improved. The disadvantages is, some lots don't get improved or developed because they can't afford the cost of the street improvements and the cost of the development, especially the type of development versus the type of street, right? So the Public Works design standards say it's a 3/4 road improvement, which means sidewalk, it's landscape strip, curb, gutter, sidewalk, curb, gutter, curb, street. And you do the street just past the midway line so that when the neighbor across the street does theirs, they're gonna blend in and meet up with that halfway mark across the street, right? So, in a picturesque world, these guys develop their property, they built their street, 5 years later, they develop theirs, they built their street, now you got this little segment of street that's fully built out. But it does nothing for north of that, or south of that, or east or west of it, right? So, it kind of puts it in those little pieces. What we have done in the past, and the code allows for, is one of two things. One is either it allows for the city to offer a agreement to not remonstrate against future development and a continual petition to the city for development of that street, which essentially says if and when the city comes in to develop the street, that property is going to be assessed the portion of that street that's needed in order to bring that street up to full improvement, which is the requirement of that adjacent property owner. So that would be your landscape strip, sidewalk, gutter, curb, and half of the street. The other thing that's allowed for is a development agreement in which the city can, a little less structurally, enter an agreement with the property owner that states a time and a place or a manner in which that future development will take place and who's going to pay for it. So it could be as broad, and we've seen them as broad as, at the time that the street is improved, regardless of how it's improved and by what financial mechanism it's improved, at the time this street is improved, this property shall be responsible for the percentage of the increase that's required at that time. So similar to the non-remonstrance agreements is tied directly to the formation of a local improvement district. It says you won't remonstrate, or you won't be an argument against, you won't be a vote against the formation of a local improvement district. It doesn't resolve the issue, well, what if you're not financing it with a local improvement district? Whether you're financing the street improvement through a bond measure, or through private funding, or through some other mechanism, street funds or SDC funds. If some other mechanism is being used to finance the improvement of that street and we don't need to form a local improvement district, then that property owner essentially doesn't have to pay for their portion of the improvements, because the only thing we have is saying they won't remonstrate against formation of an LID, but we have nothing actually holding them responsible to pay for those improvements. So the city council's directed staff to move away from issuing local or non-remonstrance agreements and to just issue the development agreements, which I think gets rid of that kind of loophole that we found specifically on North 11th Street for those who have been here for a little while. And that was the issue on North 11th Street, was the argument that I just can't remonstrate against the formation of the LID, but I'm sure as heck gonna remonstrate against having to pay for any of this, right? So that's kind of what happened in that situation. And even though we were able to come up with a lot of different funding sources to pay for the street improvements, that development still wasn't willing to pay for their portions of the street that were assigned based on this language to be improved. The other area where this has come up here more recently is an unimproved street, North 12th Street, where they want to partition the home and put a house on the back. And the design standards and Public Works came back and says, well, you need a paved access all the way back to that existing lot. Based on this, you need to only develop on frontage that's been improved, and if it's not improved, then you need to pay to improve it. And the language of that came back to the planning commission. The planning commission overrode that and said, no, they're not required to pave the street, they're only required to pave the driveway. Even though, again, it's pretty clear here, it says, if it's abutting and it's public right of way, it needs to be brought up to city standards. So I'd put two solutions out there. Maintain this, but look for areas that we can clarify. What is public right of way and what does that improvement look like and what's the extent of that? It's a little problematic still because there's proportionality in all development through Oregon state code or state law. If that roadway, and I think this is what happened up on North 12th Street, if the roadway's 200 feet long, and you're putting a single family house in there, it's not proportional. The cost of that driveway or road improvement is substantially more than the benefit of that one house. And so not only can they financially not afford to do it, there's a proportionality argument that they shouldn't have to make that full improvement. This doesn't address that scenario, that problem, right? It creates that problem. The other thing that happens is, again, those properties just don't develop because there's not enough value in that development to ever be able to pay for that infrastructure that needs to go in there, that street. Because remember, it's not just street, right? Before streets go in, we always want to replace the water lines and the sewer lines, the storm and everything else. So it's not just asphalt. It's typically a lot more than that to meet city street standards on these unapproved lots. So the other option is to go a different direction from this and to allow for development on unimproved streets. And by sometime down the road, we can either address that with the code language, or we don't address it in the code language. So either we make notification here that, either the non-remonstrance agreement or the development agreement is going to be necessary in lieu of street improvements, or they could make street improvements, or we just say if you're infill development, there's no street improvement requirements if your street currently is unimproved. And we just are silent on it. And then if the city wants to come in and do a street improvement, or the neighborhood or the street members want to do street improvements, that's completely part and parcel to whether a house wants to develop on that street or not. Thoughts?
My first question, where is this street development code?
It's under that section we were just looking at. So it's under design standards. It's not in development review. It's under design standards for site design review.
Chris, doesn't this,
It's probably access and circulation.
Okay.
Yeah.
405.
doesn't this go back to, a street fee that some council members advocated to cost of improvements like this?
Yeah, I mean, that's gonna beg, you're right, so if that property owner doesn't do the improvement, then who's going to pay for it, right? And so as the answer to that, everybody will. We'll look to increase the street utility fee somewhat substantially in order to give the city enough money to go in and make improvements to these unimproved streets. And by unimproved, I just mean they're not to full city standard, right? So we would substantially look to raise that rate. It's paid by everybody monthly, and then we would identify highest priority to lowest priority, the streets that are currently substandard, and we would bring them up to city standards.
First, a question, and I was thinking about it when you were talking about the previous subject. Well, I guess it's part of this, but if we were gonna have them, if you were gonna have them do exactly what that says there, how could they make that half-street improvement when that road improvement isn't even designed? How could they make it?
Yeah, so right now, we would require them to do, the Public Works design standards are give a little more detail, but they have to do a full engineering for that portion of the street. And then they're only responsible to construct the three-quarter street or halfway there. But the full thing has to be engineered, so that's an expense as well.
Well, I mean, we'll using 12th Street. Well, they wouldn't have to engineer all of 12th Street. I mean,
Yeah, according to this, they would get it close, they'd get some engineering that was acceptable to the city's engineer, they'd review it, and then they would approve that half-street road improvement, three-quarter road improvement.
so, I mean, that almost.
It's problematic.
Yeah,
Problematic.
okay, yeah.
Yes.
I guess I would look at that in terms of, the only thing different about that is instead of for them to actually improve that abutting portion, that they consent to this agreement to do that. At the time the city decides. That makes the most sense, to me.
One way or the other, I mean, it's, you pay it up front or you pay it in some time in the future when the costs have escalated.
Well, that's,
because they're gonna escalate over time.
yeah. it would.
I mean, there's not an easy answer for this one, because I mean, if we go back and look at the one on 12th Street, it was off of 12th Street.
Yeah,
It wasn't actually 12th.
Right.
It was
No,
a
no, no.
little- It was a little dedicated street that had never been improved.
Right,
All
yeah.
of it, and I was the one that pushed for them not to have to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm well aware of what Chris is trying to say here, and see that what I push for has got some definite disadvantages, and that the other way has the advantages. I mean, you know, I'm just gonna talk about, you know, if you go look at what we annexed on 9th Street recently, they're gonna have to do the roadway on 9th Street abutting their property, from the one property line to the other property line. They're gonna have to develop that street, 9th Street.
Based on this.
Based on this, and no other 9th Street's gonna get developed. And that was one of the things we talked about back then. And that's for some future date when there's capital's ever available. You know, if you made everybody pay for the street, i.e. through some sort of monthly assessment, then everybody's paying the penalty for one builder or one homeowner to be able to get their street that they need. And there's some big disadvantages with that. I mean, I don't know, if I were to revisit what I came up with at that point in time, I may go down a different path than I would sitting here today, from hindsight. That's where I'm trying to go with this.
I know one of the, back when I was mayor, one of the issues was about all this was, well, even in a development where they, you know, we require the streets and everything to be put in. Well, that guy buying the house, he's paying for it. He may not necessarily realize it, but he's paying for
Yeah,
that
no.
as well.
Oh, they realize.
They realized it,
What you're
believe
paying
me,
for,
when I built
yeah.
my house, I realized it.
Yeah.
Because
They
it was like,
didn't have it on a list, you know, an itemized list. It wasn't
No.
that way.
no, but
So,
I benefited from it.
well, you're right, you benefited.
I paid for it because I physically benefited from having the sewer at the curb, having the water, having electricity, having, everything was there. I didn't have to deal with it, so I benefited.
And my only point of that was that every other improved street we have, at least that I know of, the owner, and it's the streets in front of, in some form or another, they've paid for. So anyone that isn't improved, nobody's paid anything for it. So if we have a way for them to have to pay for it.
Well, I would go back and I'd argue the one there on 12th Street, that was off of 12th Street, that was 2 lots with one tax parcel. And so the person that lived there, which I happen to know, had already paid for that too, so to speak. The issue was they were splitting the lot back into the 2 separate tax parcels. So there's this, you know, I
To
mean,
your previous
so-
point, Van, how can we expect them to pay for 3/4 of the street if there's no, I mean, it would make more sense if the city had an engineering plan for all the unimproved roads.
Right.
That once you're gonna do a development, here's exactly what you have to do.
Yeah.
Not go get an engineering design done, get that approved by the city first, and then, you know,
Building portions of something decades apart almost never works.
and who's gonna pay for the initial engineering? That's a
So-
huge task.
This feels like something that's been solved hundreds of times before. What is normal in the state of Oregon?
This is normal. This is model code language coming out of
Right now.
DLCD. This is what's in our code right now, and this is what is very, very similar to what's in DLCD's language.
Oh.
This is the policy
Oh,
in
okay.
most development codes.
So is that what happens in
Life?
Salem or Tangent or anywhere else?
Some cities are revisiting this, which is why I'm right. Some cities are revisiting this and saying this is preventing infill housing. We're not getting infill housing because the cost of that street improvement is so high.
Yeah, the cost of the lot is X and the street improvements are 2.
Now, others would argue that the cost of those street improvements compared to the cost of this construction of the home is pretty minuscule when you come and look at the big picture of it. When you look at the cost of I don't want to blow this too much out of proportion, but when you look at the cost of the land and the utilities that go into subdivision compared to the cost of the building materials and construction costs of the homes, it's a fraction of the cost. And I don't know what that percentage is. Top of my head, I would say, I won't go top of head. Let me use a real example.
Well, in my home, I would argue it was 5%.
Yeah, I was gonna say 5 to 10%. So 5 to 10% of the total cost of that house is
Lot improvement,
lot improvements, including the street.
pretty standard.
Oh.
Which again, and I only know those numbers because we're looking, the state legislature for a while, I think there's still a few there, were early advocating at, removing SDC fees because that was this big obstacle for developers, and the counter argument back from the League of Oregon Cities and cities like us was like, it's such a small number compared to those cost of the building materials and the labor and all those other things. If anybody's, if your margin is so thin that the SDC is what's gonna push you to do it or not do it, especially when you look at the long-term negative impacts of not collecting those SDC fees, it just didn't make any sense. So I know those are there. Again, I'm for anything that we can do to help with middle housing and affordable housing specifically. And this may be one of those areas that we back off on a little bit. And I'm talking a lot, but as a very anecdotal illustration, my parents live in Salem. They lived in Salem their whole lives. They live on an unimproved road. It's been unimproved my entire life. They still live there. There's been generations of people lived on that street for 100 years. That's unimproved, and yet people have lived there, raised families there, moved. Other people moved in there. They've raised family there. They've moved.
So what, yeah.
It functions quite well. Road, street,
Your neighbors
cars-
want to put in an ADU, you're gonna get a brand new road. 3/4 of one,
Yeah, but
Chris,
or just split the
yeah,
lot.
John.
would it make sense to include any kind of proportionality language in this section?
Yeah, I mean, it depended on how we wanted to. Yeah, proportionality is so hard, right? Because there's language in the state code that talks about proportionality, and that's what we're going to refer back to when we look at on-site and off-site improvements that are going to be required. We're always looking at that proportionality. Before we look at that, we just look at, is there a desire to try to lessen this requirement in any way, or no? Is there no appetite? Do we want people to pay for this development goes, or is there an appetite to try to back off of this a little bit?
Was there anything like a consensus around an answer to Chris's question?
You'll have to help me out here, but I think the council is comfortable with this. I mean, I personally am comfortable with this. I'm also comfortable with an increased street fee. Even though I paid for all of the improvements in front of my house, I drive on Main Street all the time. It's one of the most dangerous streets in town.
I'm on 9th Street.
That's what I said. So I would rather see that maybe improved. I think straight, we did everything humanly possible.
Yeah.
And I think that people should be held accountable. Understand the situation on 12th Street as, one little lot on a side street. Really, it didn't make sense to me to require them to do it. But if we don't come up with some way to help fund this, to help get it done, we're going to have a bunch of unimproved streets, which may be perfectly functional, but I mean, personally, I'd rather see sidewalks. I'd rather not have ditches.
Haley, did you have some
Well, so when they're improving, it's this, they're improving the sewer and they're putting power lines underground and it's all of that, or is it just a cosmetic?
Depends on what's there already. Yeah, I mean, it depends
Okay.
on what's there already.
So I mean, I understand that. I think a sidewalk is, it depends. Like, you don't necessarily need a sidewalk on every single street. You need them on main roads to get to certain places, but I grew up in an area where we have no sidewalks. They're on the main roads and that's just, but there's not a lot of traffic on those. So I think it's kind of a case by case, but I mean, I understand it improves your property value if you know, replace the sewer and everything else. So that goes in turn with your property, that you're going to get a raise in property value that if I'm having to pay for, I'm not getting that in return. I mean, I don't know, just devil's advocate, I guess, but
Would it make sense to look at it in terms of what type of procedure would trigger that? Like a type 1 versus a type 4?
Well, your a subdivision's going to require it. That's part of the site design review is going to require it. So, and that one, you get proportionality pretty easily when you're subdividing, getting more than 3 tax lots out of it. But from there, it's really, I mean, I won't, not overly subjective, but it is a little bit subjective. It's gonna kind of pass the sniff test of what seems proportional. And you can run the numbers, but at the end of the day, it's what seems proportional, and it's gonna change if you're right next to a school. There may be a different rate of proportionality than if you're out on the far edge of town. Is that fair? Well, probably fair. It's probably not equal, but it's probably fair. So I think there, with any of these, there's going to be a little bit of subjectivity to it. But if what I don't know, I'm hearing mixed still.
Well,
If we're comfortable with this language, then we leave the language in there. We look at development agreements. I can speak specifically to North 11th Street. We were planning a local improvement district, which was why we issued the non-remonstrance agreements, is because we were planning for a local improvements on North 11th Street because there's multiple developments. I don't want to relive North 11th Street ever. But, I think what really happened there was just that terminology. That was a non-remonstrance to that local improvement district, and that within local improvement district, there's rules on how different property owners or the various property owners are going to be treated the same, regardless if you're a new development or an old development, or you have a development agreement or you don't have a development. So it kind of standardized everything where, in my view, and I think of the view of others, more recent development should have been on the hook for more of the cost than the existing homes that have been there for a long time. Seems logical, but it's not the way that the local improvement district code is written. So any grants or benefits or SDCs or anything we put towards a project had to be given to everybody equitably, equally, and assessed equitably, proportionality, I guess, to the tax lot or the impact of the lot or whatever it be, as opposed to you just develop this property, you have an agreement that you're going to improve this in its entirety, and now we're getting discounts and reductions to that because of the way the LID is done. So I think a development agreement helps there, but it's not ironclad either. I mean, we just issued a building permit for a house that was demolished, and they wanted to put a new manufactured home on that lot. So it's not even going, it's a ministerial, right? It's just a replacement or a placement of a manufactured home. It's a type 1 development review at best. It's a very simple application. It's on an unimproved street. And we tried doing a development agreement on that, and the attorney said, nope, not proportional. So I guess if you're demoing a house and replacing it, then that's a different review for us than if you're building a home, which would trigger this. So there's these little nuances kind of built into there where
So if we
cover everything.
leave this language in, there are still avenues for either the city planning department or this commission to kind of decide, is this really a good application of our
Yeah, and what we would do is we'd go into the chapter on street development, the access and circulation, and we would add language in there about development agreements and parameters around development agreements and try to beef that up. And we would, I don't know, we would lessen the local improvement district section, but I think it would become secondary to a section that talks a little bit more about a development agreement and what types of provisions could be made there.
Sounds
And
like
timeframes.
you're probably the best guy to craft that language.
Yeah, I mean, we'll run it through our land use attorney as well, but,
Does it help any if, with that, to say, or have a development agreement?
well, there's room for that here, cause this is, just says you're gonna do it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then it points you there, but it really should say, make the improvements or on an agreement with the city for future improvements or future payments or something like that in accordance to standards in chapter blah, 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 so.
I guess that would seem to me the best option, because I do feel it's important that they participate.
And another, I guess would be tangential to that is kind of tying in like what street classification it is and the width of the streets. And there has been discussion with Public Works on reducing what that width is. And we have to be careful because part of it, if it's, the only thing that's not dictated right now by the existing TSP with the street classification would be a fire lane. And the part I need to do more research on from my perspective is what's the maximum width a fire lane can be, because that could be the compromise potentially on these unimproved streets, because a fire lane only has to be 20 feet wide except at where a fire hydrant is at, and then it has to be 26 feet wide, which would be dramatically less than what the width is now, which is like, let's see, 8, 16, 26, 30, 36 feet for a local street would be the width of the curb to curb.
Yeah, not to jump the gun too much on that or muddy that, cause we may or may not include this in this version of it, we'll see
Yeah.
how far we get, we're working internally on that a little bit, but just to set the table up there real quick, if the current code allows you up to 4 tax lots to come off of one fire lane, or we call them a round, or what do you call it, what's the code called?
And I thought it was fire lane.
Turnpike,
Turnpike, yeah, I guess turnpike
Yeah.
is right, yeah.
which is, I don't think of that as a turnpike, I think a turnpike is a,
Paying money every few miles.
It's a turnpike, yeah.
our code refers to turnpike as being an unimproved, it's not fully improved. And up to 4 tax lots can take access off of it, have a shared access to it. Once you go to a 5th unit, now you can't have a turnpike anymore, you have to have a street, a city street. And so now you go from a turnpike at 20 feet wide to meet fire standards to 36 feet wide, because you've added 1 additional house. So the question we're looking at the public works side and the fire code side is, what is the true kind of maximum number of houses or dwelling units that we're comfortable coming off of a fire lane 20 feet wide, even if it's got 20 feet wide and curbs on both sides. How long does that go? What type of street is there? Once you get over 800 feet, now you got to go full street. But if you're a little 500-foot stub out that's serving 6 houses, is that really any different than a 500 street that's serving 4 houses? Right? And so we're looking at that a little bit more to see if we can, again, allow for more of this infill development that's not going to cost 4 houses or 5 houses, that 5th house. Now you've got 5 houses sharing the cost of a fully improved city street, 36 feet wide of asphalt, which is actually, then you got 10 feet or 12 feet of sidewalks and another 8 feet of
56,
landscaping. So you're 56 feet wide instead of 20 feet wide. Well, if you're on a 2-acre piece of property coming off of 15th Street, for example, and you're trying to get 8 lots around there, how do you do that when you got 56 feet wide of it's got to be street? You just don't have any real estate left to put the houses on. If you can go 20 foot wide all the way through there in the middle, you can fit 8 or 10 houses around 20 foot wide fire lane going through the middle of that. So that's just Public Works design standards and state fire code language. So we're looking at that internally, and part of it's adopted in our TSP. The TSP says that the public works director can allow for exceptions to the current, design standards that are identified or adopted in the TSP. So working that internally, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if it's again 8 or 10 or something, but I think it's more than 4.
Yeah.
But we don't know what that number is.
And what I try to do is show other examples of other municipalities that are similar size to Philomath that have much narrower streets than
It is.
there was, like Dallas had 23 foot, and there was like actually a case study written on that, and that was sufficient for fire safety. You've got some Portland streets that are 18 wide.
I'm not sure what
Yeah,
that
it's like, and purposely designed that way, so it's its own traffic calming.
was part of a master plan.
Cars have to compete for that 10 feet. And it hasn't caused a lot of safety issues, but then if we go that, some of that would have to be at the TSP review level. Fire lanes seem to, or from what I can see, is independent of that, so that was kind of the article I wanted to add.
So, yeah, we won't talk about too much. If we can make a little more progress, that we may try tying that into the design standards here and have that conversation, but we'll see how far we can get.
I'm still waiting on the rebuttal.
I mean, I'm just gonna, just say this right at the end, I don't wanna, but if we go back to the 12th Street one that we looked at, if we were looking back then at a 20-foot wide fire lane, that I think the fire lane is, you need to turn around when you go over, is it 150 feet, I
Yep.
think it is?
Yep.
So it would have, we could have done a 20-foot wide street there.
Yeah.
And we would have met the fire, and we met everything else, and at that point in time, I would probably argue, since we weren't doing we weren't doing sidewalks, I would probably argue, yeah, you would have had to have done it.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm thinking too, because from a life safety perspective, like if a fire truck can get in and out, it's like, and not have any issues, I think in the end, that's gonna be beneficial to everyone, and the benefit outweighs the cost in that perspective. So that's kind of like the frame of reference I was going with, and here's the possible.
Continue down that path.
I'm gonna try.
Okay, so we'll beef this up a little bit, make reference to development agreement, point them towards the section on, I'm gonna take street development and put access and circulation, which is the actual chapter heading. So we'll just do that, then we'll beef up that chapter 18 section.
So access and circulation also needs edits.
Yeah, I'll add language in access and circulation about, it'll have similar here, but it'll reference the development agreement, local improvement district. It's a non-remonstrance agreement. Yeah, so I think we can get there. Again, for the most part, if the development, if it's proportional to the development, we want the street improved, right? If it's not proportional to the development, and like 9th Street, the whole rest of the street's not gonna be improved, what difference is that little bit right in front of 9th Street really gonna make? Is it gonna make it any safer? No, we're just gonna pay for it, right?
Yeah.
Some instances, and which is one of the conditions for the offering an LID, is it may create a more unsafe situation, having the different centers than what it would just to defer that improvement until later.
Or drainage problems.
Yeah, so there's no requirement for the city to allow for the signing of a remonstrance agreement or development agreement, but the city is allowed to do that where it meets these conditions.
So we're 2 hours in.
Yeah.
What do you have left to talk about? Any specific questions that you had or things you were hoping to accomplish? They got brought up by others.
So, I mean, we've got plenty to work on. This is helpful for tonight. You get some good policy direction here. And we're good. Like I said, we're gonna keep chugging away and plugging away at this. We'll spend a little time this week getting climate-friendly equitable areas done. And then we're gonna move into my divide and conquer. Probably have Michael get going on the housing, cause it's a little more straightforward, and I'm gonna be doing the commercial and industrial, which is going way back to the Pat stuff, so. I sat through all those conversations, I'm probably better suited to do that aspect of it, so.
And there,
Plug away.
and there is one part in the residential side that might change, depending on what the minimum lot size for R1 that could change what, like that portion of Mill Pond, if we go with the 6,000 square feet, some of those lots are under the 6,000, so it would have to default back to the R2 in the rezone. That's the only thing I can think of that might be.
Yeah, that's a good big
different,
picture question.
Yeah.
But we were planning to have Mill Pond as R3 right now. We were planning to have it go to R1 because we were dropping the R1 lot size down to 5,000 square feet. I'm second guessing the 5,000 square foot minimum lot size in the R1 and wondering if a 6,000 square foot there wouldn't be sufficient. In that, I think there's going to be an appetite, as much as we want to increase the densities and allow for more of the infill. In most of the R1, you have established neighborhoods. You're going to have duplexes, you're going to have ADUs. If you go too small, like to the 5,000 square foot, my concern is you're going to get fewer ADUs and you're going to have, you'll have fewer lots that can fit an ADU, and you'll have a lesser potential for any type of duplex situation. So I think it may be counterproductive to go as low as 5,000 square foot per lot in the R1, knowing that it's going to preclude some of these, low expense additional dwelling units like an ADU, if you can keep that minimum lot size a little bit bigger. So we're at 7,000 square foot minimum right now. We had proposed going as far down as 5,000 square foot, which is what our current R3 is. That's essentially what you're getting in Mill Pond right now is 5,000 to 6,000 square foot lots. So what I was thinking, and this is kind of coming back all around, if instead of dropping all the way to 5,000 in the R1, we just go from 7,000 to 6,000, it's going to allow those lots to be just a little bit bigger, which will encourage more ADUs, maybe encourage more duplexes to come into those types of developments. And if we do that, the end result is that zoning map will need to tweak, because right now that R3, which is Mill Pond Crossing, we talked about going to R1 because it can go all the way to 5,000. If we're only going to 6, then we'd be looking at R2 for the current, this is the already developed portion of Mill Pond. We'd already talked about the new portion of Mill Pond that's not developed yet, phase 3 and 4. That would be R2. Because it's going to provide the townhomes and all that. So we already talked about that. But we said everything that was already developed, 16th Street over, go ahead and go R1 because it was reflective of what was there and what we were going to be doing for the code. So I don't want to put too much of a monkey wrench in there, but just if anybody is adamantly opposed to only dropping to 6,000 instead of all the way down to 5, that'd be good to hear.
So the question that brings in my mind is whether that the whole push by the state for the ADUs is really about putting additional density in existing neighborhoods. And is that really directly applicable to new developments to make the lot sizes a little bit bigger so you can do something after it's developed, as opposed to making it smaller right from the get-go? So
I'm gonna take a task, because since I'm doing an ADU and I've been down all these paths and everything else, and I'm sitting on a 9,000 square foot lot. And granted, I have a single story home it's 2 stories, but its footprint is around 2,100 square feet, including the garage. It wasn't really tight, but it wasn't overly large. I'm going to take the task of go take a 6,000 square foot lot and lay out a 1,600 square foot house on it with a 400 square foot garage on it, and find out whether, with our setbacks, find out whether you can even do an ADU, even at 6,000. And then come back and say, okay, even at 6,000 it wouldn't make any sense, so why not just go to 5,000?
Yeah.
Even though my preference is always larger lots, that's a personal preference.
Yeah.
But as far as is what we're talking.
This is the minimum allowable. It doesn't mean the developer can't.
Yeah, the maximum is only 150 of that, so now the maximum is only 7,500.
I would agree with that position, because I think if you go 6,000 to 5,000, even if you kept it at 6,000, the percentage of people who are going to build an ADU is minimal. I think you get more housing by going to the 5,000 square foot minimum.
Yeah, I think so too.
And I agree with.
And you're gonna have more if you're selling the lots, you have less land that you're selling and making them more economical for homeowners that have less resources financially, and opens it up, then spreading the cost of, if you're doing a development, spreading the cost of roads over 10 lots versus spreading it over 12 lots. That's a huge savings for the developer and the person that's gonna be passed on to buy it. Spreading that wealth over more lots.
Yeah.
Is gonna make the costs reduce, but that's really what we're trying to do here,
Increase
is what I'm hearing.
And I want to throw a question that just kind of comparing the two, like when it comes to a rent value per se versus like if someone built a house on a smaller lot, rented it out versus building an ADU, would the rent be lower in that? And so I'm trying to wrap my brain as from the
I don't know the answer to that. The ADU I'm doing is for my mother.
Okay.
And at some point it will be rented, and I would argue the rent value is probably gonna be equal to the per square foot rent value of anything else in town. So it may be a little bit of a premium because you don't have in this case, you don't have a shared wall. Maybe not. I haven't, because of the use of the ADU, I haven't looked at the long-term financial gains or whatever, or that type of thing. But that's my gut's telling me.
Because I preface that because the state has a lot of emphasis on ADUs as an affordable housing tool. So from the planning perspective, trying to wrap my brain is like, is this really going to be a cost savings?
One bedroom, $600, $700, $800 square foot house, or so what's that in a single family? I mean, if I don't know what the rents are here, I don't, if you rent $1,700 for a single family residence, my guess is you're gonna be paying $1,500 for this thing.
Yeah, I'm really looking at, I guess,
Okay, double.
Assume it's your mortgage.
I'm looking at it as a much longer. These new subdivisions coming in 20 years are gonna be 20-year-old subdivisions. And what are they going to be able to build on those 20 years from now when there's still needed housing, right? And so I get the argument. I was thinking long term. I'm more concerned about that 150% of the oversize.
Yeah.
And you're talking about the biggest lot that you can now build in Philomath is 7,500 square feet, which is right now only 500 square foot than the smallest in the R1 low density residential.
So maybe we kick that to 200%. We address it that way. We go to 5,000 and we go to 200%.
Did we make that up, or was that imposed on us?
I think in the table, we actually may have increased it. I think it wasn't a percentage, we just put the maximum lot size in the R1 was still at the 10,000. I don't think we went 10.5, but I think we kept it at.
Yeah, right now it's like 12, right? I think
It's 10.5.
it's 10.5 right now.
I think we just said minimum was 5 and maximum was 10. So we essentially did 200% there.
Would it be possible to walk through the definitions? There aren't a lot of changes. It would feel so good if we could,
I've got a bunch of comments in there.
but you can just send it.
I'll send them.
Or just,
At least get a bio, bro.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if we're gonna say anything more, I'm gonna stand up for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Only?
Quick break.
At minimum,
I was ready to go.
100% over. So, do we want to address anything else, or are we done talking for today?
If Mr. Mellott's got a bunch of comments, those might be helpful just to come directly to Michael or.
I'll send them to you.
Are there any
There's no
other-
need, there's a few things that at some point, there'll have to be a do loop to get in front of everybody, that I ask some questions, is this really what we wanna do?
Okay.
And so, but that, I don't wanna take the time to discuss them tonight, because it'd be out of context.
Is there anything in particular that you wanted to discuss?
Well, yes, I wonder if you could just address the definition of access control, which is it's in a different format than the other definitions, and I don't really know why it's needed here.
You talked about,
No, I remember reading it, and I kind of, I got it when I read it. Where is that?
This is climate-friendly equitable areas definition that got dropped in with CFPA's.
That's why it's in a different format.
Oh,
State, from the CFA language coming from the state.
so it's required to be in there.
well,
This is one that, all of these definitions are one that I think Justin's gone back a couple of times to DLC. And they've hemmed and hawed about some, and others they've said, yeah, we're okay with that one.
Where the right of the property abutting way has been acquired by a roadway authority or eliminated by law. Yeah, it's gobbledygook.
so I will say I understand it because I'm a transportation guy, and what it means is the state has control over who puts a driveway on the highway. It's theirs.
They're saying it's ours, yeah.
They're in control. I think that's all it's saying. Right?
Yeah,
That's what I read.
that's,
Mine. That's what I read.
Thank you. Something.
Only because my concentration was transportation planning that I had my brain around this very, not so
You're
confusing.
not wrong about it being gobbled. I just don't understand.
You read them.
Gobbledygook.
Yeah.
Just that version.
One question about the definitions. Has anyone cross-checked them to make sure they're actually used in the code? They're not just throwing out definitions?
Yeah, Pat did early on. We eliminated a lot of them, if I remember right.
I guess I have the question. That access control, you say it's in the climate-friendly area?
Yeah,
Only?
One of the definitions will be required for that, yeah.
Well, but you're putting it in there with everything.
Yeah, and that's where it should be. All the definitions should be in one place.
Well,
It's
no, I-
very frustrating to go into a document where you have definitions and
You don't
subcategories.
see one find.
Well, no, what I'm saying is if that's, the only purpose of that is for climate-friendly area, it should say that in that definition.
No,
I don't think
no,
so.
you create an editing and you create an absolute nightmare because what'll
Well, you don't-
happen is all of a sudden it'll be used someplace else and it won't get caught and fixed.
Well, then,
So as a guy who's written specs and all for years, that's the last thing I wanna do.
well, you don't wanna make that be the law for the whole city.
Well, but
No, but
it's just a recognition that it is the
It
law.
is.
ODOT's in control.
Well, no, on our city streets.
But
It says a highway,
It
the
says
highway.
highway.
And see, that's what I missed in what Gary's saying. The highway has a definition. However, is that in this?
Yeah.
The highway may have to be added to the definitions.
And so I think
Still
with
bad
that CFA, with everything, there's gonna be reference to that, so that'll cover that.
And, but it's there because it says where it's been required by a roadway authority. ODOT has acquired.
We probably wouldn't get our hands slapped if we said access control of highway.
And, or put it in quote marks and made it the same format. I mean, we can do that.
Don't you have definitions in section? Money.
There's a few subsections that do, but they're ones I haven't gone back in and looked at yet.
Everything we've been touching, we've been through.
Going back into here, yeah.
And you're ready to just send yours.
I was to send mine, yeah, we don't need to sit here and talk about them.
Please take as much time as you would like to go through all of this and provide us comments, and we will make those comments, integrate them into the next version that comes out. But whatever time you don't have, we will regurgitate and go through things at a high level with you as well next time. So
I look forward to doing a careful review of whichever section you say in the future you have completed, making your known updates.
If you can share a direct link to the Word document, even if it's only for view privileges, that would be appreciated, but yeah.
We will
Updated
email it to you.
PDFs.
We won't put the Word version on the website with the link, but we
Yep,
will
that's-
email it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you,
hope
Amanda.
you feel like this was productive, as frustrating as it is.
No, that's great.
It's been helpful to us.
Good, good. Staff update.
I think Michael put most of this together.
Yeah. Let's see. I'll just say add any context. So let's see.
Don't feel like you need to read it.
Yeah. Yeah, there were the two most significant things was sign permits for the school district to delineate the three different buildings: the primary school, the school district office, and the academy, and then getting the partition approved for the Benton County School.
What is the academy?
Citizens Academy. It's the
You mean the
Oh,
Philomath Academy?
Philomath Academy. Sorry. Yeah.
they're using part of this elementary school?
They're using part of the district offices is where they're centralized the Philomath Academy now.
It's like an alternative school.
No, I know. Oh, okay.
Alternative high school. I think they've got
Oh,
30 something enrolled this year. So
okay.
Man, nothing too controversial. So
Like a lot of residential plumbing.
there are quite a few, I think.
You know what those are about? I have a guess.
some of them were permits that were pulled in conjunction with the 16th Street, 17th, 18th Street sewer project. We gave the opportunity for property owners to get their laterals done at the same time we were putting the mains through. So I imagine that provided somewhat of an uptick there. Some of it's just seasonal, people trying to get it done before the rains come in, so waiting all summer and trying to get around to it. So some of it's seasonal, some of it's targeted by that project.
Okay, so our next meeting is September 30th. Yeah, I won't be here, but I hope to be able to call in.
Okay.
But-
Okay.
That's enough for tonight. Any other one? Meeting adjourned. Thank you, John, if you're still there.
You there, John?
Yeah.
Bye-bye.